Hello, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about life mantras. And when I refer to life mantras, I'm talking about kind of like principles that I've lived my life by and that I've always held up as a shining example or a good practice how you should live your life. Now, perhaps I'm going into a bit too deep there, but they're kind of four things that I've constantly through my life before my diagnosis always kind of said to myself, used myself, given advice to other people, and I've instilled into my own daughter these mantras for life. Don't get too excited, they're not very profound or exciting, but it's just interesting because they all tie in with my Aspergers, and looking back now, it's funny how these mantras that I was always trotting out and living by were being controlled by my Aspergers. So one of the things that's always bugged me is people's lack of common sense. Now, I must say that this is how I perceive the majority of people in most cases, that they haven't got any common sense. They don't think past their next move, and they, because of that, get themselves into tricky situations where if they'd have only thought things through before they rushed into something, they would have realised it was a bad idea. And it's always amazed me how people have such small amounts of common sense. But so it isn't that people have such a small amount of common sense, it's the fact that as someone with Asperger's, my brain is wired to think about multiple scenarios and outcomes and do risk analysis, in my head, that if I do this, there's a good possibility X, Y and Z might happen afterwards. So when people do something that I thought was just bloody obvious, it isn't obvious to neurotypical people because they don't go through their daily lives planning 4, 5, 6, 7 steps ahead of what they're actually doing at that time. So when I always used to refer to people as not having any common sense, it was because I was holding them against my way of thinking and the way I would be processing and how I would be viewing things, cause and effect. For everything you do, there's going to be an effect, and that's why I've gone through my life not really taking any risks, not really being spontaneous, not doing anything crazy, and because of that, I've never got myself into big trouble. If I've got into trouble, I've known the risks. I've taken a calculated gamble, and if something happens, then I knew what the risks were. So I've always instilled in my daughter to have common sense, and what I didn't realise was that was my Asperger's saying, think shit through better, don't just do things reactively. So that amused me when I look back at every time I said and mentioned common sense. The other thing that I have said to people in the past, and that I have said to myself, is if you're not happy in a situation or an environment or something that's going on, take yourself out of it. Do not worry about what other people are going to think or say. Do what is best for you at that time. Don't worry about what anyone else is going to say. And once again, I think that's probably because I had already had multiple cases of overload where I'd been in situations I didn't want to be in, didn't know why I didn't want to be in them, didn't know why they were bugging me so profoundly, that I had to have this kind of escape plan and this mantra that if it all gets too much, just get up and leave. Just walk out. No matter what the situation, don't feel like you're compelled to do anything in your life that you're not comfortable with. No matter who you think you're going to let down or disappoint, you don't have to do anything in your life. All you have to worry about is yourself. And I'd instilled that in my daughter quite a bit as well, saying to her, you do what's best for you always, and if you're not happy with something, you say something, or you just remove yourself from the situation. And she has taken that on board, and she's a very strong-minded, positive person because of it. She doesn't take any bullshit. She doesn't do anything she doesn't want to do. And people see that as a big strength for her. But basically that was my Aspergers again, once again telling myself, don't stay somewhere you don't want to be. So that was the second one. I think the third one would fall into the category of shit happens. This world isn't perfect. Things are going to happen out of your control that are shit, and that you've just got to dust yourself off and get on with it and learn to fight your battles. Learn to know what ones you can fight and what ones you can win, and just, I suppose for want of a better word, just just give in to some things in this life you can't control. Now, that was probably born out of me going through multiple scenarios where I thought the world was against me, and that everything I did never quite was right, never was how someone else wanted it to be done, or things that happened to me that just didn't make any sense. They weren't logical why they were happening and why they should happen. They were somebody else's rules or regulations or laws or anything that was basically invented and by NT people, because I was always going against that, and I never understood how the NT world worked. Obviously I didn't know I had Aspergers, and I didn't know it was my outlook on life was the one that was twisted. You know, I'm in the 1%, and the 99% of the world lived harmoniously with their environment and how the NT world and society deemed we should all act, and the laws and rules. So I always thought I was being shortchanged, and people or institutions had it in for me, because I could never see the sense, I could never see the logic in things sometimes that I had to do, and I kicked against it. And then sometimes, or at some point, I must have learned that there are some things you can change, and then there are some things you can't change. And then so there's times when basically you just got to walk away and agree to disagree. But once again, that was my Aspergers coming through, not understanding how the world worked, and telling people that, you know, shit happens all the time, you just get on with it, because that's what I was doing. Shit was happening to me all the time, I didn't understand why, and I was just getting on with it. I had no other choice than just to keep moving forward and crack on with it. So the fourth thing that I've kind of always looked at as a kind of little way of living is trust your gut, trust your instincts, know what's best for you. So don't bother asking other people for their opinion, because their opinion doesn't mean shit. It really doesn't, because they can't put themselves in your shoes and evaluate the situation and give you good sound advice. Well, that's what I perceived, because I think I'd had advice down the years from people over many different subjects that I never got, I never took on board, I never understood, always felt like that's rubbish advice, I'd never do that. And that's why, because I was getting neurotypical advice for an autistic person, so I never understood their logic, and there were times I really regretted taking advice from other people and not doing what my gut instinct was telling me to do at that time. So that's why I would say, and have said to my daughter and to other people, do what's best for you. Trust your gut. What do you think? Don't listen to other people. You're the one that's got to live with the consequences of the decision you're about to make. So unless that is all positive, then don't do it. Don't do it because someone else thinks it's a good idea, because they can't possibly know what's best for you. And once again, that was my Aspergers, not understanding the neurotypical mind, and having already had many instances in my life where I'd been given advice by people that just didn't make any sense. So I just learned to ignore it and eventually just not ask people for advice. And I genuinely can't remember the last time I actually asked someone for their advice when I just didn't know what to do. Because any decision I need to make. I can't make it if I've got other people influencing my decision. That's just illogical for me. You should always do what's best for you, and because you know yourself better than anyone else. So they're kind of the 4 mantras that I've lived my life with. Never having made the connection until I got diagnosed that they were actually coping strategies for life. They were things that I did to make my autistic life better in the neurotypical world. But I didn't know it at the time, so I would always give people, these pieces of advice based on these philosophies I had. And more often than not, people didn't take my advice because they didn't understand it either, I suppose. I was coming at it from, they were zigging, I was zagging. We was always seeing things from the opposite side of the coin. So I never took advice from anyone. I don't ask advice from anyone. And if anyone asks my advice, I say to them, no point asking me. You're the one that's got to live with the decision you're about to make. So don't palm it off and let someone else make it for you. I just thought that might be interesting because it was kind of fascinated me when I'd look back on these things that had happened, and these coping strategies that I'd gone through my life with were actually all because of my Asperger's, and I had no idea why. So thanks for watching again, and see you soon.